Thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. During the question and answer session, please press star 1. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now I'd like to turn the meeting over to Jessica Stromberg. Thank you. You may begin.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jessica Stromberg, and I'm a project coordinator in the Office of Renewable Energy Programs at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. I've been with the program since 2009, and I'm the lead in the Projects and Coordination Branch for the Deepwater Wind and Bay State Wind projects offshore Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and for managing the BOEM Intergovernmental Renewable Energy Task Forces for both Massachusetts and Rhode Island. This morning's meeting of the joint BOEM Rhode Island and Massachusetts Intergovernmental Renewable Energy Task Force is being held until approximately 11:40 a.m., at which point we will hold a public question and answer session until approximately noon. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available to view on BOEM's website. Task Force members will be placed in a muted status until the end of each presentation, at which point Diane will open the line and you'll be able to ask questions and provide feedback by pressing star 1. Members of the public will be placed in a muted status until the end of the intergovernmental session, at which point Diane will open the line and you will be able to ask questions and provide feedback by pressing star 1. If anyone has trouble accessing the Adobe Connect webinar link, we have made today's presentations available on BOEM's website. I'd like to now introduce Jim Bennett, the Chief of the Office of Renewable Energy Programs at BOEM, who will be providing opening remarks and introduce the speakers today.
Thank you, Jess. I assume we have all the connections are working okay? Great. Again, my name is Jim Bennett. I'm the Program Manager for BOEM's Renewable Energy Program Offshore. And I'd like to thank the members from the Rhode Island and Massachusetts Renewable Energy Task Forces for joining us today, particularly Bruce Carlisle from Massachusetts and Grover Fugate, who I understand will be joining us if he isn't already online, as well as representatives from Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey. I also want to thank the members of the public who are here today, and to the stakeholders representing industry, maritime, and environmental organizations, and of course the fishing community and other key constituencies. We really appreciate your sharing your knowledge and expertise with us throughout this process. It's a pleasure to be here, and we're talking about what is a very exciting time for the offshore wind industry in the U.S. We, as the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, are responsible for energy development on over 1.7 billion acres of the outer continental shelf. And wind energy is becoming a very, very large component of that energy diversity. We have leases now, particularly in the Northeast. We have leases off of every state from Massachusetts to North Carolina, at least one federal OCS lease. We're in the process now of shifting our energies not away from leasing, but in addition to leasing, towards the review of site assessment plans and construction and operations plans. And we're looking to up to a dozen wind farm projects in the Northeast over the next decade. In addition to that, we have great cooperation from the states who are providing incentives, and they're here. They're going to speak. The leadership from Rhode Island and Massachusetts are going to speak to their activities, and they have been pursuing policies to incentivize the development of offshore wind. And these policies include procurement targets for offshore wind and offshore renewable energy credits that could support over 8.5 gigawatts of energy on the federal leases that are now in place. We've gotten to this point because the we have a very heavy reliance on interaction with the Intergovernmental Renewable Energy Task Forces, who play a key role in facilitating communications and ensure that our information needs are fully met so that we can provide the best available information to make the best decisions possible. And we appreciate the task force's involvement in as early stage as possible, and now in particular as these projects get underway and we're looking at effects that extend beyond a single state, we appreciate the participation of Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey in this process and in future processes. Today, you're going to hear updates on BOEM's renewable energy leasing efforts on the Outer Continental Shelf, offshore Rhode Island and Massachusetts, and including the leasing activities, the proposed sale notice for the Massachusetts sale off of Nantucket, the status of existing commercial wind energy leases off of Rhode Island and Massachusetts, and we're going to hear from Vineyard Wind regarding their construction and operations plan for commercial lease OCSA 0501, which is off of Martha's Vineyard off of Massachusetts. We'll also be hearing from industry on current leases on the status of their various projects. We're also, as Jess mentioned earlier, going to set some time aside so that there'll be some Q&A with the public. So we appreciate your participation. I understand Grover is now on the line, and I'd like to introduce Grover. He is the Executive Director of the Coastal Resources Management Council for the state of Rhode Island, and he's going to give us an update on the status of activities in Rhode Island, to be followed by Bruce Carlisle, the Director of the Office of Coastal Zone Management for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Grover, and thank you to everybody for being here, for joining us today.
Thank you, and good morning to all the task force members and others that may be on the call. In terms of Rhode Island, there's quite a bit of activity actually ongoing right now. We have the Block Island project, but there are a series of monitoring efforts that are related to the Block Island project that I think will provide some information to help us consider the other developments that may be on their way in the offshore waters here in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Right now we are working with Deepwater. Deepwater has 3 projects that they are potentially either bidding on or underway. The first is South Fork, which is obviously related to a procurement that they've gotten in New York for about 90 megawatts. So that project is going through the final design phase for submission of a COP, and we've been working with them for well over a year on looking at the impacts of that project, particularly with regard to the fishery and how that might be constructed to minimize those impacts. In addition to that, Deepwater also has obviously bid in on the Massachusetts procurement, as well as a Connecticut offering that just came out. So there are potential 3 markets that they're looking to try to develop to, as well as potential expansion within Rhode Island as well. So Deepwater's looking at 4 different states with these projects that they have ongoing. We also have, obviously, Ørsted or Bay State Wind that is going through. We have been meeting with our Fishermen's Advisory Board and the Habitat Advisory Board on looking at the studies that are being done and providing comments on those studies as they get ready to develop their construction and operation plan, as well as Vineyard. And Vineyard has also been meeting with the FAB and HAB, and as we know, have submitted their COP to BOEM. We had a meeting earlier this last week, I should say, on the notice of intent for this project, and that was also accompanied by a meeting with the Fishermen's Advisory Board with BOEM on these projects. Vineyard Wind has submitted a consistency determination to us. We are going through that. We've also submitted to Vineyard Wind a stay agreement to give us more time to review their consistency determination or certification so that we can have the proper amount of time to go through that process. And also related to this, we are in the midst of developing what is called a Bay Special Area Management Plan. Two of the companies, Bay State and Deepwater, are potentially coming up the bay with cable routes. So as part of this plan that we're doing, we've put together a working group called the Cable Working Group to see if we can't designate a corridor within Narragansett Bay or corridors that would help facilitate the siting process with those cables going up through the bay and hopefully provide at least what the state might see as the more desirable routes. Developers will not be limited to those routes, but they would be, obviously that the regulatory hurdles, I think, would be lessened if they use the designated routes as part of that plan. So that's just sort of a quick summation of the activities we're engaged in with all three developers here. And we're waiting to see what else pops up, I guess, with the other two lease sales that are about to occur. Thank you.
Trevor, Bruce, are you on the line?
Yes. Hello?
Yes, Bruce, go ahead.
Okay, yes, thanks, Jim, and thanks, Jessica. Good morning. My name is Bruce Carlisle. I'm the director of the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management. I'm here on behalf of Massachusetts Energy and Environmental Affairs Secretary Matthew Beaton, and I work with my colleagues Bill White from the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center and David Pierce, who's the director of the Division of Marine Fisheries, as kind of the 3 points of contact and leadership on offshore wind for the Commonwealth. So I do have some time later on the agenda to provide some updates, and I've got some slides. So I'll keep my remarks right now short and basically welcome everybody. Since 2009, the task force has played a really important role convening our federal, our state, our local, and our tribal officials and elected members to provide really important feedback and dialogue with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. I think, and Jess or Jim can correct me, this may be our 14th task force meeting. It is an important time for offshore wind here in the Northeast. And as I'll speak to later on, we have a solicitation and procurement process underway here in the Commonwealth. We've been working on a significant amount of environmental studies and other investments for the industry, and we're doing a significant amount of work with stakeholders as the leaseholders now are working on developing and submitting their construction and operation plans and beginning the environmental review process, and we'll hear more about that today. So I just want to stress the importance and the value of the task force engagement and your input and your work with your colleagues and your stakeholders in your local communities as we move forward on the next steps. So I'll turn it back over to Jim and Jess, and thanks everyone for joining.
Trevor and Bruce. So we have a packed agenda today. As Jim mentioned, we have several presentations, BOEM presentations, as well as we're going to hear from each of the commercial SEs, Bay State Wind, Deepwater Wind, and Vineyard Wind. So I'm going to begin with a very brief overview of recent Federal Register notices that have been published. This is an overview slide that provides context to what we're talking about here today. We have a lot of activities from, as Jim likes to say, Cape Cod all the way down to Cape Hatteras and beyond.
And beyond.
The first notice that I'm going to mention is the publication of the Vineyard Wind Notice of Intent to prepare an environmental impact statement. And as Jim mentioned, Vineyard Wind will be later today presenting details of its submitted construction and operations plan, and Meredith Lilly and Frank Krever will be discussing BOEM's process for the COP review. The NOI was published in the Federal Register on March 30th and is open for a 30-day public comment period ending on April 30th, 2018. The next notice that you will hear more about today is the publication of the proposed sale notice for commercial leasing for wind power offshore Massachusetts. It is the Atlantic Wind Lease Sale -4A or ATLW-4A. We all like our acronyms. That was published in the Federal Register on April 11th, 2018 for a 60-day public comment period through June 11th, 2018. And Jeff Browning and Luke Feinberg will be going over the details of the TSN in the next session of today's webinar. The third update that we wanted to go over in this session is the publication of the New York Site Call for Information and Nominations, which was also published in the Federal Register on April 11th, 2018 for a 45-day public comment period, which ends on May 29th, 2018. The New York Site Call identifies initial areas under consideration for leasing and also solicits nominations of interest from industry, as well as additional information on existing uses and environmental constraints to inform the identification of wind energy areas. Luke Feinberg, who is on today's call, is the lead for New York and for the New York Site Call. The final update that I will be discussing in this session is the publication of the request for feedback on BOEM's proposed path forward for future offshore renewable energy leasing on the Atlantic Outer Continental Shelf. This notice was published in the Federal Register on April 6th, 2018 for a 45-day public comment period. BOEM is conducting a high-level assessment of all waters offshore the U.S. Atlantic coast for potential future offshore wind leasing and published the request for feedback to help assess which areas along the Atlantic are the most likely to have the highest potential for successful offshore wind development. Jeff Browning is the lead for the Atlantic Leasing request for feedback and path forward and is also on today's call. Before we transition to the next session, we have a few minutes to answer a few questions from task force members or hear feedback about these updates. All of these notices are available on our website. Keep in mind that you will also be hearing about the Vineyard Wind COP and the Massachusetts TSN in more detail shortly. Diane?
Thank you. We will now begin the question and answer session. If you'd like to ask a question, please press *1. You'll be prompted to record your name. To withdraw your request, please press *2. One moment, please, while we wait for the first question. And as a reminder, if you do have a question, please press *1 and record your name. Catherine Ford, your line is now open.
Thank you. I was wondering if there are any chances for extensions, particularly on the Vineyard Wind COP EIS scoping document. Several of our constituents have requested an extension on that deadline.
This is Jim Bennett. As of right now, we're not planning on an extension. But if you want to contact us and let us know what your situation is, we should be able to accommodate some comments that come in after the deadline.
Okay, thank you.
I show no further questions.
Thank you very much. At this point, we are going to move to the next session. Let's just give me a moment here. I'd like to introduce Jeff Browning and Luke Feinberg, who will be discussing the proposed sale notice for commercial leasing offshore Massachusetts.
Good morning, everyone. This is Jeff Browning, project coordinator for these two proposed commercial leases that we have for the PSN. As you know, we met last September to go over a draft PSN, and so today we're going to discuss the background of the PSN, the different views we received on that draft PSN from the task force, and we're going to highlight the differences like we did last time between the original sale in 2015 of the Massachusetts lease areas, as well as the draft PSN that we had back in September and the PSN we published recently. And we're going to discuss the TSN Contents and the next steps regarding the PSN. So as you know, we've had a few milestones that have preceded this PSN. Massachusetts has put out their RFPs in their to promote the development of 1,600 megawatts of offshore wind energy, which has spurred quite a bit of interest. December 16th and January 4th, we received two unsolicited applications for the two areas that went unsold in the first Atlantic wind sale off of Massachusetts. That pretty much made it directly competitive. They identified the exact areas and both areas at the same time. So we moved forward with drafting the PSN, and we discussed that a little bit at the May 16th task force, and during the September task force meeting, and we actually shared the draft PSN and solicited comments. And from there, we tweaked our PSN a little bit and published it on April 11th. Excuse me. And so here's the four commenters input we got for the draft PSN: the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Town of Nantucket, Senator Markey, as well as Representative Fernandez. For the most part, they are all very similar, just slightly differences. Massachusetts made it clear that they were supportive of a lease sale in 2018 and supported our proposed one lease per company rule, meaning only one entity can win one of the two leases. They cannot win both of them. And everyone was in support of a multiple factor option. If you remember, in our draft, we proposed just an ascending bid, and for the most part, the comments reflected that they would like to see generally the same parameters in the previous auction, so that's what we worked with. And go to the next slide. So with that, we have the differences of the different auctions, or the notices. So the first one, we obviously had 4 leases, and the 2 remaining went unsold. We started with a minimum bid of 1 acre, had a multiple factor auction, and did not have the one lease per company rule. What we did for non-monetary factors, we had a CBA of 10% and a power purchase agreement of 25%. What we proposed in our draft back in September was for the 2 leases, $2 an acre, an ascending bid with the one lease per company rule and no monetary factors. And as we mentioned, the different input we got from stakeholders, we tweaked a little bit. We changed it to a multiple factor auction with a CBA of 5%. And the next slide will get into the details of the TSN Contents. So there's the lease areas that are identified, the auction format, and what's really important is the stakeholder input requested. We know that we shared a draft with the task force, but now this is a chance for task force members again and general stakeholders to provide input on this PSN and what everyone would like to see the PSN look like. And as a reminder, here's the 2 areas. The green and orange are proposed lease areas 502 and 503 that will be for this next lease sale. And I can turn it over to Luke to discuss the auction format.
Thanks, Jeff. So for this auction, we're proposing a format which is online and anonymous, which is very similar to what we have done in previous auctions. And as Jeff mentioned, it will be multiple factor bidding. So what does that mean? One of the factors is monetary, the cash that you're willing to put up for the lease, as well as non-monetary factors. What we're considering here is this 5% community benefits agreement. Additionally, the one per customer rule has been stated, where only a lessee can only win one of the lease areas. And while the previous lease sale was $2 an acre, or excuse me, $1 an acre as minimum bid, we're going to $2 an acre, which is very similar to what we have seen in other states recently, New York and North Carolina. And recognizing the history of these lease areas, we've streamlined the qualifications process a little bit. So if you were a bidder that qualified for the first round back in 2018, you simply need to let us know if you're still interested in bidding here, and let us know if anything has changed regarding your financials and technical qualifications. If you submitted an unsolicited request, you know who you are and you don't have to qualify for this sale because you've already qualified on the unsolicited request. And if you are new to the process, then you will go through the similar qualification process that you would in normal circumstances. So as Jeff mentioned, this is the time in which we're looking for input towards the PSN and towards the auction process in particular. And one of the things we're seeking information on is the multiple factor auction format. So the request was for a 10% credit, recognizing the interest in the industry right now and the history we've seen with previous lease sales, and the fact that we've entered in this situation by receiving two overlapped unsolicited requests. We have an understanding that there should be a higher demand than the previous lease sale for this area, and in order to make sure that because it's a percentage, the amount or the value of the community benefits agreement will increase as the bid amount increases. And so we've chosen a 5% as a number to keep that credit limited. However, we're interested in comments on that and thinking about things like caps on non-monetary credit. So there could be a situation in which you have a community benefits agreement credit of 5% that is not to exceed a certain amount. So we're interested in information and that folks have related to that. And also, just because we're considering a community benefit agreement as a non-monetary factor, that doesn't mean there's other ones we could consider. So we're interested to hear folks' feedback. As you will notice, the lease delineation has remained the same since the original sale. If there are opinions on that, we would like to hear whether we think that this should be further divided. But note that if we do move forward with further dividing these areas, that could result in a little bit of a delay in our process to accommodate for that. And in addition, thinking about things like buffers between lease areas are items we're soliciting comment on specifically. And now Jeff will talk a little about the timelines and next steps moving forward.
Yeah, so as some of you know, with these proposed sale notices, we have an auction seminar, and that's actually in 2 days. It'll be another webinar, and it'll be held here in Sterling, and you're welcome to attend in person or log in. Those details are on our webpage. That'll be up in the next slide or two. The comments, as mentioned before, for the PSN and qualifications are due June 11th, either submitted online or postmarked by June 11th. The published final sale notice, we're expecting that to be published in October. The lease sale would be around December, and with that, we expect to execute those leases roughly February 2019 or first quarter of 2019. And just kind of in the big picture with how this rolls into Massachusetts' next solicitation for their RFPs and contracts. We expect that to be June 2019. So we anticipate that to give hopefully the new lessees time to prepare a package for that proposal. And the auction seminar details, again, are on our webpage, but they're also right here for you to see. 9 to noon, same time that we're doing with here. And that was really geared towards, we expect a couple of overseas people to call in, so it's always easier for them to call in for the morning instead of the afternoon. And that is the address for the webinar and the call-in numbers. You'll see there's 2. We wanted to make it as easy as possible for international callers to call in. I've been assured that that number will work for international callers. And if not, like this one, we'll have everything posted to our webpage, and they can reach out to me directly. On the next page, I believe, is our contact info. Or no, this is following, sorry. One last thing, comments as mentioned, postmark or regulations.gov by June 11th. And if you have specific questions about the qualification materials and what you need to do to submit those, reach out directly to me at Jeffrey, jeffrey.browning@boem.gov. Next slide. And here's the contact information with the web address for the proposed commercial leases. It has the information for the auction seminar, the PSN information up there, and it also lists some of the information about the unsolicited application.
Thank you, Jeff and Luke. At this time, we have a little bit of time for a few questions from the task force members. For Jeff and Luke, any questions that you have about what they presented about Massachusetts proposed sale notice? Diane, can you please open the task force member line for questions?
Thank you. And again, as a reminder, if you do have any questions or comments, please press *1 and record your name. Again, please press *1.
Jess, it's Bruce Carlisle.
Hey, Bruce.
Yes, so thanks very much for the update on the proposed sale notice. I think the Commonwealth weighed in previously, and I think you heard also from some other folks on the multi-factor format and the discount that may be in place for a bidder that has negotiated and executed a community benefit agreement. We're going to continue to advocate for the 10% discount. It's the same discount that was used in the first auction held in January of 2015. It is consistent, therefore, and we also think it's going to really encourage developers bidding on these two unleased areas to really work very closely with host communities and develop these agreements, which really, I think, help to build support and obviously have significant benefits for our local municipalities. So, respectfully, I think you're probably going to see a comment letter that does request that same 10%. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
I was just going to ask, Bruce, do you have any thoughts on capping that? Because, we've as we expect this auction to go a little more than the last one, do you see any reason to have a limitation on that, or what are your thoughts on that idea? I mean, because if we have a cap, you could say a higher percentage and it goes to a cap, or that you could play those numbers that way as well.
Yeah, I think that's a legitimate concern point, and I think that we'd want to sort of take a closer look at that, and maybe you can talk about how it may have played in previous auctions. And certainly, I will need to take that back with our team here and our leadership to figure out where we land. But, I do think it's a fair and legitimate point and something we'd want to look at.
Okay, thank you.
We do have one question. Mary Kruger, your line is open.
Since you keep pointing out various aspects of links and things on these slides, will they be available after the call?
Yes. They should be available now. The website should be live with the presentation. But yes, we'll send out an email.
Okay, thank you.
I show no further questions.
Thank you very much. At this time, we are going to start the session to hear directly from the commercial lessees in the Rhode Island and Massachusetts leased areas. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mike Evans from Bay State Wind, who will be providing an update on the status of activities for the Bay State Wind lease area, which is commercial lease OCS-A. Mike, whenever you are ready to move to the next slide, just say next slide, please.
Okay. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Evans. I'm an environmental permitting specialist at Ørsted. As you probably know, Bay State Wind is a joint partnership between Ørsted and Eversource, and I'm on the Ørsted team in Boston. Next slide. So I'm just going to give everyone an overview of the project and where we're at, some of the things in our design envelope and our proposed COP submittal schedule, an overview of the surveys that we've done to date and what we have upcoming this summer, some of the other studies that we're doing, an update on our stakeholder engagement, and a little bit on the commercial development. Next slide. So our project design envelope that we're using is going to be in phases. So we're calling the first area the Phase 1 development area. It's about a little more than half of the size of the whole lease area. We're going to be permitting 180 turbine positions. So there'll be 165 positions with 15 alternates. That leaves us flexibility within the envelope. Based on, what, if we win megawatts from Massachusetts or Connecticut, how many actually get built will depend on the results of those bids, but we'll be permitting up to 165. We have 3 foundation options in our envelope, the monopiles, the jackets, and suction bucket jackets. We have 2 to 4 offshore substations, inter-array cables connecting all of the turbines to the substations, and then our export cables to shore. We'll have 2 export cable corridors, one going up the Sakana River to Brayton Point in Somerset, and another going through Vineyard Sound to Falmouth. And 2 new onshore substations, one at Brayton Point in Somerset and a second in Bourne, and associated interconnection cables onshore. Next slide. So the yellow area there is our whole lease. The orange is the Phase 1 development area. That's the area where all of our turbines will be. We took the turbines off of this slide. Our engineers are currently looking at the positions of those to try to tweak some layouts based on transit corridors and some other input from fishermen. So we're looking at reviewing some turbine positions in there. You can see our 2 export cables, the red going up the Sakana to Brayton Point, and the purple going to Falmouth, and then onshore a couple miles up to Bourne. Next slide. So our plan right now is to submit our COP at the end of this year, which gives BOEM a couple of months to publish their notice of intent, and then going into the 1-year process to issue the final EIS within a year after the NOI, and then the COP approval and record of decision soon thereafter. Next slide. So far, we've deployed 2 FLIDARs and 1 meteorological buoy. So those are our meta-ocean buoys that were deployed last summer. We've completed 3 different geophysical campaigns, sort of mostly reconnaissance level, before the FLIDARs were installed, along the Somerset export cable, and within the Phase 1 development area that we just wrapped up earlier this month. Our geotechnical we started earlier this year within the Phase 1 development area. I'm at the wind turbine positions doing the CPTs and fiber cores. That vessel is still out there now. Should be done hopefully fairly soon. We've done benthic surveys last summer along with the geophys along the Somerset cable route and the Phase 1 area. We've been to a whole bunch of key observation points, do our photographs for our visual simulations last fall. Last summer we also did offshore boat-based avian surveys, and we've done some initial reconnaissance onshore at our substation locations. Next slide. So coming up this summer, starting next month, we have another geophysical campaign where we'll be doing the archaeological 30-meter tighter line spacings, doing that on both export cables and the lease area around the turbine positions and all the inter-array cables. In June, we'll start our geotech campaign on both export cables and some of our HDD locations. We'll also be doing benthic surveys where we're doing video transects and grab samples, collecting some water quality information along with that, and doing our sediment analysis along both export cables and the lease area, filling in some data gaps where we had done initial benthic surveys last year, so filling in between those and doing the other areas. Next slide. We're also doing some onshore surveys, doing ambient sound around our substations and the HDD locations at the noise-sensitive areas. We'll be doing some additional photographs at the key observation points for our visual simulations. We have architectural reconnaissance surveys, onshore cultural and onshore wetland surveys. Some of those we're still waiting for survey access, so those are on hold for the moment until we get permission for those. Next slide. In addition to the field work surveys, we're also doing a lot of desktop analysis and simulations and models. So we'll be doing photo and visual simulations based on using the photographs that we take in the field. We'll be doing sediment transport models in air and underwater, acoustic models, onshore and offshore EMF models, air models. We're doing a navigational risk assessment, an aviation risk assessment, a cable burial risk assessment, and then some ongoing fisheries studies. Next slide. As far as our stakeholder engagement, we had open houses last fall. We started our pre-application and pre-survey meetings with federal, state agencies, and the tribes. We've met with BOEM and before each survey for our lease. We have to do pre-survey meetings with BOEM and then with the agencies, and we've also done the same thing for some of those assessments that we talked about to make sure our models are contain everything that that they need to and are done correctly. We've had community liaison officers on the vineyard and out of a New Bedford office. We've had engagement with multiple NGOs. We've met with Woods Hole Oceanographic. They're also doing some surveys on their own this summer. So we've met with them and are meeting with them again this week to make sure our surveys don't overlap with each other and our vessels are out of each other's way. We're going to lots of conferences and workshops and meetings and on panels. Next slide. For fisheries, we have an ongoing fisheries communication plan that's constantly being updated. We have fisheries liaison officer John Williams, who is constantly on the trail talking to fishermen and all of the local fishing organizations. There's over 50 or so different organizations that we've had contact with. We've had fishing and industry reps on all of our survey boats. We had our own Bay State Wind Fisheries Advisory Panel, which we had moderated by a third party and met with ourselves and some of our team, as well as some selected fishermen in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We've been to Fisheries Management Council meetings in New England and the Mid-Atlantic. We're issuing notice to fishermen, notice to mariners for all of our survey activities. So the fisheries, we obviously know this is an important topic for everybody, so we're trying to stay on top of that as much as we can. Next slide. And as far as commercial development, we've got our bid into Massachusetts, which I know was just postponed by another month, so hopefully the end of next month we expect awards from that. We've also submitted a bid into Connecticut just earlier this month. We've had some partnerships with NEC Energy Solutions for battery storage, and we've got also Gulf Island Fabrication and EEW for some steel manufacturing in Massachusetts. And then we've got a ton of other partnerships in place with Mass Maritime, Woods Hole, Bristol Community College, the Red Sox, some other nonprofits. So, that's where we are with that. I think that's our last slide. So that's an update for Bay State Wind.
Thank you, Mike. At this time, Diane, can you please open the task force member conference line for any questions for Mike Evans about the Bay State Wind update?
Thank you. And again, as a reminder, if you do have any questions, please press *1 and record your name. Again, please press *1. Catherine Ford, your line is now open. Catherine Ford, please check your mute button.
Hi, Mike. I was wondering what the ongoing fisheries studies are that you mentioned.
Sure. We're looking at our, at the science plan. We know have been a topic that's been brought up with our consultations on doing, what type of baseline monitoring to do. So it's something that we are considering right now and looking into, the economic studies, looking into science studies. So it's a work in progress as we get additional input from fishermen, on where the best use of our resources are to do those studies.
Okay, so you don't have any actual studies underway at this time?
Not anything official at the moment, no.
Okay, thank you.
Megan Ottens-Sargent, your line is open.
Hi, this is Megan Ottens-Sargent. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. I'm curious about studies with regard to the North Atlantic right whale and other marine mammals.
Sure. In what regard?
Well, I didn't hear you mention anything about marine mammals or the right whale, so I'm curious. I know you're probably working with a habitat group, but what else are you doing with regard to studies? Because right now we all know how imperiled the species is, and I know some of the other wind developers are involved with mitigation funds and research.
Yeah, so we have, first of all, our ongoing geotech and geophys surveys have, IHAs that we've applied for
IHAs, I'm sorry.
Incidental harassment.
Uh-huh.
So we're doing, complying with all of our lease restrictions for the ongoing surveys, and then for our COP, we're doing acoustic modeling for sound for mostly the pile driving to look at, the sediment and water, to how the sound waves propagate, and any effect that will have on the right whale and other marine mammals. We've also there's some other studies that have been done between BOEM and the DEC that we'll look at and analyze for noise effects.
Have you considered working with anyone in Woods Hole to help fund more survey studies?
I'm not sure the answer to that off of the top of my head, but it'd be a question for one of our fisheries folks that I have to double check on that, on what our engagement with them has been.
Okay. Well, I'd love to hear what it is, if you could follow up. Thank you.
Okay.
Diane,
I show no further questions. I show no further questions.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike. At this point, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Wilson from Deepwater Wind, who will be providing an update on the status of activities for the Deepwater Wind New England lease area, lease areas, which include commercial leases 0486 and 0487. So just give me one moment to pull up the presentation. Stephanie, are you on the line?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Great. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. My name is Stephanie Wilson. I'm the Director of Permitting and Environmental Affairs at Deepwater Wind. And you can go to the next slide. I'm going to give a brief overview for those who don't know who we are, and then go into an update on some of the projects that we have going on. So Deepwater Wind is, okay, sorry, that's okay. So Deepwater Wind, we're located in Providence, Rhode Island. We own 3 federal leases off the Atlantic coast with over 2,000 megawatts of capacity. We have 2 lease areas off of Rhode Island, Massachusetts, in the Rhode Island, Massachusetts wind energy area, and then 1 lease area off of Delaware. We're also, next slide, the developer of Block Island Wind Farm, America's first offshore wind farm. That's located about 3 miles off the coast of Block Island and approximately 16 miles off the coast of the Rhode Island mainland. It consists of 5 wind turbines, and it has actually been in operation just over a year, so that's really exciting. We just had our 1-year anniversary. It's currently powering over 17,000 homes on the island, and then we also have a main line, a line that goes back to the mainland into the grid. During construction of the project, we were able to offer and employ over 300 construction workers. Next slide, please. So, the next project that I wanted to talk a little bit about is our South Fork Wind Farm. So this project actually is the first project in the phase of development of our Rhode Island, Massachusetts lease area, which is lease area 0486. We finalized a power purchase agreement with the Long Island Power Authority back in 2017 to develop a wind farm that will service and plug into Long Island South Fork. We're in the process of finalizing our permit applications and anticipate submitting them this spring, so we're in the throes of this right now. Very busy time. But that would then, the submittal of the permits would then kick off the environmental impact statement and review period, and anticipate a record of decision in 2020. And our schedule is to start construction in 2021 and be operational in 2022. Next slide, please. So when we were last in front of the task force, the Rhode Island, Massachusetts task force, we were talking about survey work that was upcoming in 2017. So to give you a little overview of what we did this past year, we conducted full geophysical and geotechnical work, as well as marine archaeological and benthic work within the wind energy area, as well as along multiple potential export cable routes. And you can see in the map here, we looked at, in order to plug into the South Fork of Long Island, we're looking at developing our project within the southwest area of the lease area. So we surveyed that area, and then we had a northern route as well as a southern export cable route. So both through stakeholder feedback and results of the survey, we were able to determine a preferred route. Right now we're looking at the southern route as being our preferred option. And then we also made some refinements to the wind farm area. This year we're anticipating doing some additional geotechnical work within the wind farm area and further locating the project. Next slide, please. And so the next project that we're looking at within that wind energy area is our Revolution Wind Farm project. So this project is a project that we've submitted proposals into both the Massachusetts and Connecticut procurements, as mentioned earlier. This project offers a total solution in that it offers generation from an offshore wind farm, an expandable transmission route, as well as grid scale storage options. Next slide, please. We're offering a few alternate configurations for the project, both a 400 and 200 megawatt size. These projects, we believe these project sizes offer the best option for long-term cost effectiveness in allowing it to minimize the impact to the ratepayers in the near term by buying smaller quantities when the prices are high. I think this also allows the local supply chain and the labor force to develop and mature, which then can create a sustained job growth. So like I said, we submitted this proposal to Massachusetts and Connecticut. The plan is to interconnect into Brayton Point, Massachusetts, and or Quonset, depending on the results of those procurement processes. Next slide. So as part of the Revolution Wind Farm project, we're planning I'll give you a little update on some of the survey work that we have planned for this summer. Like I said, we'll be doing some additional geotechnical work for the South Fork Wind Farm project, but then we're also planning on doing some geophysical, geotechnical, as well as some marine archaeological and benthic work for the Revolution Wind project within that wind energy area. But associated, with this work is, a wide variety of surveys and assessments that we're undertaking to support both of the projects. In addition to the geophys and geotechnical surveys, we're also doing, visual impact assessments, wetland delineations of the landfall areas, habitat surveys. We're conducting avian and bat surveys. We've got some sensors on the operating Block Island wind farm, as well as we've been putting cameras and sensors out on our survey vessels in order to collect some more avian and bat information. We're conducting fisheries surveys. We have a cod spawning survey that we're undertaking right now, in which we've been trying to evaluate out in the wind energy area. Taking into consideration in the development of our projects. We have, a variety of modeling tasks, including for electromagnetic field modeling, noise and acoustic modeling, both underwater and in air, onshore and offshore. Some sediment transport modeling that is based on the results of our survey work that was conducted last year. Air emission analyses. We have a navigational risk assessment as well that we're developing. So there's a lot of surveys and assessments that are going along in addition to just the boat-based surveys. So next slide, please. And then in addition to that, there's a large amount of stakeholder engagement activities that we're undertaking as well. So this goes beyond just interacting and meeting with the governmental agencies, which we're getting various approvals and authorizations from. Some of the other key stakeholders that we're we're just engaging with our, the environmental groups, as well as working with the Native American tribes and the commercial fishermen. So next slide.
We lost a little bit of audio there. Could you just repeat the last thing that you said?
Sure. So just some of the stakeholder engagement activities that were undertaken in addition to meeting with all the, government agencies, both federal, state, local. We're also meeting with the environmental groups, Native American tribes, and the commercial fishing industry. Next slide. And just to, key in a little bit more on some of the outreach that we're conducting with the fishing community. We've got a fisheries communication plan that we're constantly updating and working through. We have a fisheries liaison, Rodney Avila, and then we also have a variety of fisheries representatives in some of the key ports that we're working out of. Rodman Sykes out of Point Judith is our Rhode Island fisheries representative. Ed Washburn with the New Bedford Port Authority is our New Bedford fisheries representative. And then Julie Evans is our fisheries representative out on Montauk. So their contact information is on the slide, and that will be provided. We've also conducted a series of open houses at the various ports throughout the winter and are conducting ongoing meetings with various individuals that have approached us at those meetings and whatnot. So key to these meetings, as well as, meeting with, the other stakeholders and whatnot, is, the idea of, planning our science program, not only in developing these projects and citing the projects, but also planning for additional science to be done both before, during, and after construction. So, and I believe that's it. Next slide. And so this last slide is actually just an example of some of that collaborative science that we're undertaking associated with the Block Island Wind Farm. We're conducting demersal trawl surveys, and you can see we've engaged a commercial fisherman in order to conduct those surveys, get the data that we need, and then report back out on it. So, and that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. At this time, Diane, can you please open the task force member conference line for questions?
Thank you. If you do have a question, please press *1 and record your name. Again, please press *1. Sue Tuxbury, your line is open.
Hi, I was just wondering about the surveys for revolutionary wind that you mentioned. I was wondering, are you going to be planning to meet with the agencies? I'm just thinking regarding those surveys, and I'm kind of just wondering about timing. Are you waiting for the procurement process to be finalized before that starts?
Yeah, so I mean, I should say that the survey work for Revolution is probably going to be like late summer, early fall time period, as we're, getting some other work underway, and obviously our applications for South Fork in. So that's probably going to be a late summer activity that we will be reaching out to folks to, discuss and work through. So,
thank you.
I show no further questions.
Okay, thank you, Diane. Thank you, Stephanie. At this point in time, I'd like to introduce Rachel Pachter from Vineyard Wind, who will be providing an update on the status of activities for the Vineyard Wind lease area, which is lease 0501. Just give me a moment, please. Rachel, are you on the line?
I'm here.
Okay, great. Take it away, and just feel free to let me know when to move to the next slide.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the call. As we've kind of already talked about already, Vineyard Wind has a lot going on and a lot to go through. For this presentation, we focused primarily on the COP itself, given that there's an open comment period. There's a lot of other issues that can be discussed, so happy to answer those in Q&A, or anyone on the call should reach out to us at any time to go through any of these. Next slide, please. So where are we in the process, I think is probably a useful item right now just to touch base on. We submitted multiple applications for the project in December at both the state and federal level as the cable runs through Massachusetts waters and lands on Massachusetts upland and travels through the roads on Cape Cod. We do have multiple state permitting levels as well as the federal process that we're talking about in the meeting today. So we submitted some of those applications in December, and some activities taken place. Most recently, BOEM had their scoping hearings last week, and there's an open public comment period on the EIS. The Energy Facility Siting Board is having a public comment period now until May 8th, and a public hearing tonight on Cape Cod, and any information you're looking for you can look up on our website. And we, particularly for the state agencies and other regional agencies, we will be submitting our draft environmental impact report on Monday, April 30th. So that should be available soon as well for the state permitting. Next slide. Where we are in the process, just to get an idea, we have kicked off the permitting process, but there's quite a ways to go and a lot to go through and a lot of public comment opportunities. So I'm not going to walk through this slide in detail, and this is specific to a project that is connecting a cable in Massachusetts. The green items are all the items we've begun. The blue are the items we've completed, and you can tell there's a long way to go and a lot of review on the project to be done. Next slide. So the overview of our project, the COP we submitted was for an 800 megawatt project, and we are about 14 miles south of Martha's Vineyard. We submitted for between 8 and 10 megawatt wind turbines. We would be basing our construction out of New Bedford with support from other nearby ports. We would be basing our main operations and maintenance out of Martha's Vineyard, Vineyard Haven in particular, with some additional maintenance being done out of New Bedford for larger vessels. And our interconnection point is the Barnstable Switch Station, which I will talk about in a future slide. Next slide, please. So our project does include a grid pattern layout. We do include what we would call fixed locations, and our engineers had originally laid out the project in a much more random fashion in order to collect more wind energy, but we were able to convince them based on stakeholder comments that these turbines should be aligned in order to facilitate activity out in the offshore environment. Our spacing is about an average of 0.8 nautical miles, and we have up to a nautical mile in multiple directions for what I would call a transit corridor. And although I think there's the 0.8 nautical miles is also able to be transited. We have multiple opportunities in terms of adjusting the layout. We have additional locations included. So for those who've already done the math, we have 106 turbine locations, and if we're talking 8 to 10 megawatts per turbine, we do have at least 6 spare locations, if not a bunch more. So that will allow us to remove locations as we go through the stakeholder process, whether that's a navigation concern, whether we find something from an archaeological standpoint, or engineering-wise, we find an anomaly out there that would make it unsafe to install a turbine in a particular location. There's also the opportunity for micrositing, which would be small movements of the turbines to avoid, to give more space for a transit lane or to avoid any sort of archaeological item that we may find in our survey work. We have 2 electric service platforms included. They're a little hard to see on this slide, but they're up against the northwest side of the lease area. It would either be 2 or 4, but if we have 4, they would be 2 smaller ones in each location, so they would visibly look like just one in each of the locations. Next slide, please. The wind turbines are, pretty basic, but we did put in the wind turbine sizes, obviously, to address the impact analysis. We're just at the very highest tip height, we're just shy of 700 feet. Next slide, please. We've included 2 foundation types, the monopile and the jacket foundation. We include either 100% monopiles or 50% monopiles and 50% jackets. We do have scour protection at each location, and that takes the form of basically like a riprap or rocks at the bottom to prevent the sand from washing away. The footprint of the project, including the export cables within the area that we're developing, is less than 0.5%. I should note too that what we call, for those who've I'm sure spent tons of time already reading the COP, we call the wind development area the area within our lease area that includes the 800 megawatt project that we submitted a COP for. So that does not cover our entire lease area. That covers a little less than the northern half of our lease area. We will have mitigation during pile driving to reduce the noise. We'll have soft start, and there will be a cleared exclusion zone prior to starting any pile driving. Next slide, please. And then getting the cables to shore, getting the power to shore, a long, complicated process of trying to work through a variety of stakeholder environmental issues in order to pick the best route. We did include multiple routes within the COP, although our plan is to use a single route. And this is the same is true for the state permitting. We included the multiple routes in the state permitting as well. And it would be up to 3 cables in a single corridor. And some of the factors we obviously need to take into account would be an offshore route, a landing point, and an upland route that all need to work together. And then there's the environmental issues, including mapped habitat from the state of Massachusetts and any additional habitat we might find during our own surveys, which are still ongoing. And in terms of water depth, we do need a certain water depth to use the vessels to install the cable, avoiding the eelgrass, and trying to minimize or eliminate any impacts to hard and complex bottom. I will note we do include, I know cable burial is an issue that comes up a lot, and our primary goal is to bury the cable, and to that end, we do plan to install the cable primarily using jet plow, but we have included other tools, if you will, in the COP as well as the state permits to allow us to either get under the mobile seabed, so we might dredge some of the sand waves in order to not install a cable 6 to 8 feet down and then have the sand wave move within a few months and have the cable exposed. So we would be possibly doing some dredging for that. We also have some mechanical tools that we might be able to use to help get through any harder bottom along the way. Next slide, please. And I apologize, this one's not super easy to see, but we do have an upland route, a primary upland route, and an alternate upland route to get the cable to the Barnstable substation. We have a route primarily through Yarmouth to the east, which is the green line. Both routes are about 6 miles long, traveling to from Yarmouth through all roadways and right-of-ways, except for one exception where we're looking into the use of a bike path or a future bike path. Everything is within the roadways. And another route through Barnstable to the west in blue. Next slide, please. So the construction and operations plan, which is now available on the BOEM website, just want to give folks a quick overview on what's in there and where to find it, although I would encourage you to not be shy about reaching out to us anytime. We're happy to help you find any information you're looking for that we've put together for the project. We can also take additional information as the COP is itself still a draft and it can be updated. And we will be updating it at least one more time, I think, for BOEM's review. So volume 1 is our project description, and that really basically describes everything I talked about in a little more detail, as well as some of our outreach, the regulatory framework, and has a few key appendices, a draft oil spill response plan and a draft safety management system. Those get finalized a little closer to construction, but are out there for public comment and input as we go through the process. Volume 2 includes all of our survey results, primarily focused on the geophys, geotech, archaeological, project design related items. And Volume 3 is where the impact assessment and analysis has been included that we've provided to support BOEM's NEPA review, and these areas are all the ones that I think Mike and Stephanie kind of already talked about. So we talk a lot about the physical resources, the geology, the air quality, the biological resources, marine mammals, fish, birds, socioeconomic resources, commercial fishing, and some appendices to support that, including our fisheries communication plan. That can also be found easily on our website, and we welcome comments on that at any point, and some other impact areas, including navigation, questions about scour, additional information about birds and whatnot, and fisheries are included in Volume 3. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through a lot on our outreach right now. I think some of what we as developers do is we're all kind of talking to various folks on the individual projects. So obviously ongoing consultations, official and unofficial with all the agencies, tribal consultations, fishermen. There's a lot going on there. We have just hired a fisheries liaison for full-time outreach. We've had a couple of folks doing it part-time, so that is so that's kind of a new addition there. And we continue to have, I would say, we probably average 3 to 4 fisheries-related meetings alone a week. This week alone, we have a meeting with conch fishermen that we've invited them to join and learn more about the project. We'll be attending the New England Fisheries Management Council and continuing to try to work through some of the challenges that folks are concerned about offshore. Additional discussions, environmental advocacy organizations, specifically on the North Atlantic right whale. I think somebody had asked about that. There's certainly a lot of focus, both from a permitting and a stakeholder perspective there, as well as a lot of on-site research that's been done and continues by the state of Massachusetts and by BOEM to make sure that our analyses are inclusive of the most up-to-date information on where the whales are and what they're doing and how to minimize the impacts to them during project installation and project operation. A lot of local outreach too, the cable routes, folks that are going to be, impacted potentially by upland construction, nearshore construction. So we've been doing things like open houses, having office hours, getting out and reaching everyone. And before I conclude, just a couple of other updates. We will be installing a single meteorological buoy sometime in May. We will keep folks updated on that and also include notice to mariners. We are still awaiting SAP approval from BOEM, but as soon as we get that, we should be shortly thereafter installing a buoy. We do have ongoing geophysical and geotechnical work offshore. It started a few weeks ago. Anyone who needs to reach us, there's notice to mariners on our website. Call us anytime. We do want to check in and see how it's going and if folks have any questions there. So we are doing both geophysical, geotechnical, and biological surveys, including additional eelgrass surveys just to confirm what we've seen or not seen of eelgrass along the cable route. Yeah, so I actually think that's the bulk of what I wanted to go over, but happy to answer any questions and also happy to meet with anyone in the group.
Great, thank you so much Rachel. At this time, Diane, can you please open the task force member conference line for questions?
Thank you. And again, as a reminder, if you do have any questions or comments, please press star 1 and record your name. Again, please press star 1. Mel, your line is now open.
Thank you. Hi, Mel Cote, EPA Region 1. Thanks, Rachel. Just a quick point. On one of the earlier slides where you showed the federal and state permitting requirements, you had a list of federal statutory authorities that would apply. And I didn't see Clean Water Act there. It's not a huge piece, but you've got certainly where you're coming ashore with the transmission cables. You'll have 404, which will involve EPA, the Corps, and the states. And to the extent there may be incidental discharges associated with the construction activity, if not the operation activity, I know some of the offshore LNG terminals require NPDES permits for at least during the construction phase, so it might be worth adding that to your already long list. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. I think if you, I will do that. The Clean Water Act, I actually didn't have room under the Army Corps in the slide, but I will address that. And we do anticipate NPDES for the upland, which I would characterize under the federal with EPA, which we have 2 permits, including the air permit,
right.
The OCS air permit, as well as the NPDES permit.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
I show no further questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Rachel. We are now going to be moving into the portion of the agenda where BOEM is going to give a presentation on the Vineyard Wind COP review. And so I'd like to introduce Meredith Lilly and Brian Krever, who are the leads for the review of the COP.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'll start by providing an overview of the Vineyard Wind COP review process, and then Brian Krever will discuss, as Jeff just said, the environmental review and consultation process. Okay, thanks. So this slide gives a basic overview of our leasing development process. So this process takes many years, and at the moment with respect to Vineyard Wind COP, we're entering the orange area over here on the right. That's where they submit their COP and they start reviewing their COP. That's about 3/4 of the way through the process, but much work remains to be done. So for now, though, I'd like to focus on the area to the left here, circled in blue. And over the next few slides, I'll touch on some of the work we did earlier on the process. So with regard to stakeholder outreach in Massachusetts, we've held 13 task force meetings, the first one being in November 2009, and 20 public meetings. We've also engaged with the Massachusetts Fisheries Working Group and the Habitat Working Group. So here, this is our original Massachusetts planning area. Back in 2009, this is the area we started working with when we held our first task force meeting. And through working with various stakeholders, including the Department of Defense, state and regional groups, we eliminated areas of high conflict, which brings us to this area in 2010. So this is the area that we solicited comments on when we published our request for interest in the Federal Register. We're trying to get more information on the suitability of this area for wind development. And we received a lot of comments about fisheries conflicts and habitat concerns in the eastern portion of the area, as well as navigation concerns in the southern portion. So in response to all those comments, we removed about over 50% of the area, as you can see here. And that resulted in this area, which we solicited feedback on in our call for information and nominations in 2012. So here, you can see we removed even more because we received more comments and helpful information from the public and from various stakeholder groups in Massachusetts and other areas and other states on the Massachusetts area. And based on those comments, we removed a small area up here in the northwest. So if you go back, you can see that small area was removed. That's Cox's Ledge. That's an area of high fishing concentration. And we also removed an area to the east. You can see here that was taken out. That was the area with a high concentration of sea ducks. So this results, here we have our wind energy area in 2012, and we put this area up for auction in 2015. So now, what you see here are the results of our 2015 auction. So during the auction, we received bids on the two lease areas over here, this Bay State Wind here, furthest to the west, and Vineyard Wind here. And then the two other areas here were unleased, but we recently received interest in these areas, and so as Jeff Browning discussed earlier, we have gone out with a proposed sale notice and may auction these areas off later on in the year. So these two areas highlighted right here. So moving on, now we're going to get, now this is, before I do that, this area highlighted in gold here, the northeastern part of Vineyard Wind's lease, this, as Rachel said, is the Vineyard Wind, and other people have said, this is the Vineyard Wind project area that they propose to develop in their construction and operations plan. Now we're going back to our leasing and development slide, process slide. And at this point, we're going to focus to the right here on the COP review process. It's encircled right here. And this process starts with COP submittal. Vineyard Wind submitted their COP on December 20th, 2017. And the next step you can see here is completeness and sufficiency review that we do here at BOEM. Now, the completeness review is already done. We have deemed the COP complete, meaning that it contains the basic information required by our regulations. And it's really a cursory review. It's basically, is the required information present, yes or no? So it's pretty quick, relatively quick compared to the sufficiency review, which is much more involved. And that's what we're doing right now. So during the sufficiency review, we ask whether the information provided is sufficient to conduct our environmental reviews and consultations with various agencies. And that's what our environment branch does, this OBrien, the Environment Branch for Renewable Energy. And we also ask whether the COP contains sufficient information for us to conduct our technical reviews. And that's what our Engineering and Technical Review Branch, ETRB, does. The sufficiency review usually involves a few rounds of us asking the lessee for more information. So we're still in that process right now. And we determined that Vineyard Wind's COP has enough project information and detail to begin our public scoping process. So we are carrying out these processes concurrently, the sufficiency review process and the public scoping process, which Brian Carver is going to talk about in just a minute. And the other thing to highlight here is this area circled in blue. This is basically from COP submittal all the way to COP approval. This process can take 2 years or more, so in a nutshell. So moving on, what must the construction and operations plan include? So first, it must contain project information for all planned facilities, not just those offshore, but also those onshore and also support facilities. The COP must include survey results, including the results of geophysical, geotechnical, archaeological, and biological surveys. It must include an overall site investigation report, which integrates the findings of geophysical, geological, and geotechnical survey results. And also a certified verification agent CDA nomination package, an oil spill response plan, safety management system, and the safety management system describes how the developer will ensure the safety of personnel and anyone on or near the proposed facilities. And the COP must also include other information, including information on hazards, coastal and marine uses, water quality, biological resources, and a number of other resources. Now, what must the COP demonstrate? It must demonstrate that the proposed activities will comply with applicable laws, regulations, and lease provisions, that the proposed activities will be safe, that they will not unreasonably interfere with other uses of the outer continental shelf, that they will not cause undue harm or damage to resources, including natural resources, property, archaeological resources, and so on. And the COP must also demonstrate that the proposed activities will use best available and safest technology, best management practices, and use properly trained personnel. So now what's next for Vineyard Wind COP? Well, we can approve with conditions, or we can disapprove the COP. And this decision will happen after we complete the environmental impact statement, and it will be documented by the record of decision. And if we approve Vineyard Wind COP or any COP, the lessee then submits this facility design report and the fabrication and installation report. And we don't technically approve these reports, but rather we do not object to them during a 60-day review process. And if we do not respond within 60 days, then our non-objection is assumed. And the last point here is the safety management system. And the point here is that it must be fully functional before the developer can start construction activities. So that wraps up the overview of the COP review process. And now, Brian Kreber is going to discuss our environmental review and consultation process under NEPA.
So the kind of the umbrella law that we'll be using to do our environmental review and analysis for the Vineyard Wind Construction Operations Plan is the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. You probably heard it referred to previously. It's a law that requires federal agencies to assess the environmental effects of their proposed actions and reasonable alternatives prior to making decisions. Notice I did not call it the National Environmental Protection Act. NEPA recognizes that there will probably be impacts from federal actions, and it allows for that. But what it tries to do is analyze those impacts as much as possible and then provide that information to decision makers while also looking at alternatives, letting decision makers look at those as well, and coming up with mitigation measures for the impacts that are identified. Some major actions and decision points where we do NEPA is on lease issuance. We did an environmental assessment for the issuing of the Bay State Wind and the Vineyard Wind leases back in 2014. And this covered survey work and some of the site assessment activities. We also do additional NEPA on plan approval, which includes site assessment plans, construction and operations plans, and general activities plans. And we also do environmental reviews for decommissioning activities. Next slide. So the slide Meredith showed you earlier with our timelines had that kind of area at the end where we're entering in at kind of the back 3/4 of our overall leasing and approval process. But if you take a look at this environmental review and approval process timeline for a construction operations plan, we're really at the beginning. I'm going to go through some of these in more detail later, but you can see that you have a submittal of the COP, the public scoping, which we're doing right now, then the drafting of an environmental impact statement and the publishing of that draft, and then the publishing of a final environmental impact statement, and then finally a record of decision on that document. So the Notice of Intent to Prepare an Environmental Impact Statement was published on March 30th of this year in the Federal Register, and there's a link to the Federal Register notice there. What this notice does is it kicks off our EIS process as well as our public scoping process. We have a 30-day public comment period that ends on April 30th of 2018. And what this tries to do is identify the significant issues that should be analyzed in the EIS. Also, it tries to identify issues that are not significant and maybe have been adequately covered in some previous environmental review, and then we can eliminate them from further detailed review. We also try to identify gaps in the data we have and information needs, as well as come up with reasonable alternatives. So last week, we held 5 public scoping meetings in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We started off in New Bedford, next day went to Martha's Vineyard, and on Wednesday, April 18th, we had 2 meetings, one during the day in Nantucket, and then one in the evening in Hyannis, which is around where the cable landing is. And then we finished up on Thursday, April 19th in Kingston, Rhode Island. So what is an environmental impact statement? It must be prepared if an agency is proposing a major federal action significantly affecting the quality of the human environment. And I wanted to highlight the fact that we say human environment here. A lot of times when you think of the environment, you think of wildlife, whales, sea turtles, birds. But NEPA specifically directs you to look at the human environment, and that encompasses things like commercial and recreational fishing, recreation and tourism, things like that affect people as well as wildlife. When you're doing an environmental impact statement, this public scoping is required, and you're also required to publish a draft environmental impact statement. You can't go directly to a final, and once you publish a draft environmental impact statement, a 45-day public comment period is required. So what is actually in an environmental impact statement? Well, you have the action that's being analyzed, or the proposed action. And for this particular project, that would be the construction and operation of an offshore wind energy facility. And you have to look at alternatives. At a minimum, you have the proposed action and the no action alternative. But we'd really like to get some more alternatives than that. And that's one of the things we look for in our public scoping. These alternatives have to be within what is the purpose and need of the project, which is to construct and operate a wind energy facility between 400 and 800 megawatts in the Vineyard Wind project area. So an alternative can't be something like, oh, why don't you do a solar project in the Vineyard Wind area, or why don't you do a wind project off of South Carolina. Those don't meet the purpose and needs of the project, so they would not be alternatives we can look at. However, we could look at alternatives such as a different transit route through there, different turbine spacing, things of that nature. So and also mitigation measures, seasonal restrictions. Those are some of the alternatives we can look at. Also, we have to look at cumulative effects in our environmental impact statement. This is something that's come up a lot. You've just seen presentations from several wind developers in the same region hoping to do projects around the same time. Under NEPA, we have to look at the incremental impact of the proposed action when added to past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future actions. Some of these future actions, such as the construction of these other projects out there, as well as non-renewable energy activities that might occur out there. And we recognize, and why we do cumulative effects analysis, is that the project itself can result in individually minor impacts. However, the collective impacts of all of these projects together could result in significant impacts. So that's really why you do cumulative analysis. This just shows some of the resources we look at when we're doing our environmental impact statement. It really ranges from what I said earlier, like marine mammals, sea turtles, air quality, water quality, to things like environmental justice and tourism and recreation. Also demographics and employment, so we will look at the impact on jobs that the project will have. So you've probably heard the term design envelope, and wanted to talk about briefly how we will conduct our environmental review of the design envelope. Even though that term might be something new, it's not really a new thing within the National Environmental Policy Act and environmental documents. It's really just looking at a reasonable range of actions. And so within that range of actions, we'll look at the maximum impacting parameters for each resource. So the largest pile and the loudest pile driving for marine mammals, for instance, is what we look at. And so on as you go through every element of the project, you look at whatever would be the maximum impact producing factor and apply it to that resource. And so we'd also have a reasonable scenario for cumulative impacts. So you look at all the projects in the area, but you wouldn't necessarily look at 2,000 turbines in each project, which could be the potential maximum build out or something like that. You really look at what is a reasonable scenario for adjacent projects and how that could look in the future. And all of this environmental review that I've talked about will run concurrent with our required consultations. Next slide. This is a quick snapshot of some of those consultations. It's certainly not all of them. There's a lot of consultations and a lot of coordination that has to occur. So I just wanted to highlight some of the big ones you've probably heard of. Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, the Coastal Zone Management Act, which will be with both Massachusetts and Rhode Island,
the Endangered Species Act, and the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act. So I wanted to quickly mention a recent executive order and a recent secretarial order that's really driving our timelines for this environmental review. Executive Order 13807 requires that all environmental reviews and authorization decisions for major infrastructure projects be completed within 2 years of the publishing of the Notice of Intent. This is a major infrastructure project. Our Notice of Intent was published on March 30th. So on March 30th of 2019, or 2020, all the decisions would have to be made. However, those decisions could be made earlier. So that's as long as we're allowed to take, but it can happen earlier. There's also a requirement for one federal decision. So all the agencies that have kind of authority over this project have to make this decision together. There's also a secretarial order that applies to all agencies within the Department of the Interior. This is Secretarial Order 3355, and BOEM is within the Department of the Interior, so this applies to us. It requires that our environmental impact statement from Notice of Intent to Notice of Announcement of a final EIS, so basically completing the environmental impact statement, has to occur within 1 year. So that would be by March 30th of 2019. And it also has page limits on the environmental impact statement, 150 pages or 300 pages for an unusually complex project. And that's excluding appendices. However, the appendices cannot be longer than the actual document itself. So you can see that there is a bit of a constraint with pages. However, this does not mean we will not do a thorough analysis. There are many tools we can use to get that information in the document without extending the amount of pages. Something like incorporating by reference we'll probably rely on heavily, so that you don't have to have 10 pages to describe what a sea turtle is. We'll summarize that information and then we'll reference a document that talks about that. So based on the secretarial order and the executive order, these are the EIS timelines that we must adhere to, and this is our schedule going forward. In the fall of 2018, we will publish a draft environmental impact statement and again have a 45-day public comment period. In the spring of 2019, we'll be publishing our final EIS, and by the spring of 2020, we must conclude all consultations and publish our record of decision. So how to comment? Our comment period is open until this upcoming Monday at midnight, I believe, and so please get your comments in as soon as possible. However, if you need extra time, we'll be accepting comments after that at that point. But the later comments come in, it might be more difficult for us to incorporate them. So I do encourage comments to come in as soon as possible. You can submit them in writing to our office, or the easiest way is probably to go onto regulations.gov, enter the keyword BOEM-2018-0015, and then comment on our document there. So before we go into questions and answer, I wanted to point out that we have a project-specific website for the Vineyard Wind project. The link is there, but it's just www.boem.gov/vineyard-wind, and you'll have all the information from our scoping meeting. You can access the construction and operations plan there, as well as visual simulations. So it's a great source of information.
Great. Thank you very much, Meredith and Brian. I believe we have a new operator on the line, Amanda?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello, Amanda?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We'd like to move into a question and answer session. Can you please request the task force member conference line, open that for question and answer?
Okay. If you'd like to ask a question, please press *1. One moment for our first question. Our first question comes from Catherine Ford with the Department of Marine Fisheries. Your line is open.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could describe some of the takeaways from the scoping meeting.
Sure. We had 5 scoping meetings, and I think there were different reactions and concerns in different areas. We started off in New Bedford, and there was a lot of great feedback about potential impacts to fishermen. And there's definitely some concern about the impact of this project on how people make their living. So we got a lot of good comments from there that we can incorporate in our document. The fisheries concern was kind of echoed throughout all of the meetings. There was a different concern really highlighted in Hyannis. There was concern by the community about the cable landing location at Lewis Bay. We learned a lot about Lewis Bay, and I think there's some really good information that can help inform our document, especially in our alternatives analysis there. And then when we ended up in Rhode Island, there was, the different fisheries in different locations, and the Rhode Island area, especially from Point Judith, is very concerned about the squid fisheries. And so there was some great suggestions about potential changes to the layouts and a desire for us to work with them and the developers on some of those issues. So just generally some great feedback and potential alternatives for us to look at, as well as the concerns that stakeholders have that we need to address in the document.
Okay, thank you. I have one more question. One of the challenges in reviewing these documents is that not all of the referenced material is available online, or it's only available through university libraries. So some reports that are referenced in the Vineyard Wind COP are not available. And if you're going to be incorporating by reference a lot of documents in your EIS, a lot of people won't be able to access those documents without paying for them or going to a university library. So I was wondering if you could comment on how those documents might be made more easily available.
These are documents referenced in the COP itself?
Yeah, there are a couple of Cape Wind documents that were referenced. And Rachel, I believe you're on the line. We haven't had an opportunity yet to reach out to Vineyard Wind requesting those documents. We just did a quick Google search, and we're unable to get them.
We haven't started writing our environmental impact statement yet, so that the availability of documents is something we'll look at once we start that process. But it's hard to comment on our strategy to do that until we've really started that process. We're still in the scoping process right now.
Okay, thank you.
And Catherine, this is Rachel. Just send us the list. We'll get you whatever you need.
Thanks, Rachel.
At this time, there are no further questions, but as a reminder, please press star 1.
Great. At this point in time, this is the session in the agenda for task force members to provide updates. We have a presentation from Bruce Carlisle with the Office of Coastal, who's the Director of the Office of Coastal Management at the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Bruce, are you still on the line?
I still am on the line.
Great.
Excellent.
Just let me know when you want the next slide.
Sure, that sounds great. Yeah, and thanks everyone. Just going to take a few minutes here to provide some updates from Massachusetts with respect to kind of offshore wind, a little bit of context and sort of next steps. So next slide, Jess. So I'm going to touch on quickly some of our policy and legislative drivers, talk quickly about some of the stakeholder work we're doing in addition to the task force, environmental studies and infrastructure investments, and then quickly on where we stand in terms of reviews and permitting, really specific to Vineyard Wind at this point in time. Next slide. very important in the sort of Commonwealth context and sort of the background and history here. We're talking about offshore wind as a really important piece of our state, of our regional and our national and global efforts to deal with climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In Massachusetts, that sort of policy is embodied in our state's Global Warming Solutions Act, which requires economy-wide, so across the entire Commonwealth, across all the sectors, greenhouse gas emission goals relative to 1990. So 25% below by 2020 and 80% below by 2050, and implementing regulations to meet those standards. And there are other legislative drivers, but another really big one and really specific to what we're talking about today is the Energy Diversity Act of 2016, which, among other things, requires utilities to solicit 1,600 megawatts of cost-effective offshore wind energy over the next 10 years. We are in the tail end of the first procurement process. So 3 bids were submitted by each of the developers and the projects you heard about earlier this morning. And the utilities, the Department of Energy Resources, and an independent evaluator are in the process of reviewing those. And as you probably heard, the target date for selection and negotiation is next month, the end of next month. Next slide, please. This is just a map. We've already seen a bunch already today, just to sort of remind people about the context, including both the deep water north and south lease areas, the Bay State wind and the Vineyard wind, along with the 2 areas that are the topic of the proposed sale notice that we discussed this morning. Next slide. So, as we've sort of talked about, an important part of the process here, an important part for BOEM, and really sort of a piece of the National Energy Policy Act, is this concept of the task force, with representatives from the federal and state agencies, elected members of government from state and locals, as well as tribal representatives, sitting around the table or in this case on the phone and webinar, reviewing and providing input and feedback and guidance to BOEM as they go through their siting and analysis and leasing process. But we've also recognized that is limited to essentially government representatives. So back in 2010 and 2011, we formed 2 working groups with stakeholders, sort of important stakeholders in offshore wind, to augment the task force. So that's our habitat working group and our fisheries working group. In addition, whenever we get a chance, if BOEM's holding a task force meeting or we're in town for another announcement, make a concerted effort to get out to municipalities and cities and towns to hold community meetings and updates. And we've done meetings with stakeholders and community meetings, probably over 100 now since 2009. Next slide, please. This slide is regards to our fisheries working group, and I know in Rhode Island they've got a similar entity, the Fisheries Advisory Board. In Massachusetts, this group was convened, as I said, back in 2011, and we've got members from different sectors and from different ports, commercial and recreational. We've got scientists and state and federal agencies, and really it's a forum to allow for these stakeholders to interact directly, and for the Commonwealth to be able to take concerns and issues and understand them better, and then to convey them and make recommendations back to BOEM sort of as applicable. And I think the key point here is that, while we've been at it for a while with this group, we still have a lot of work to do. And in some ways, when we're starting to look at some of the construction and operation plans and getting into the specifics of the proposed projects, in a lot of ways, this is where some of the work really begins. So we really look forward to continuing to work with our fisheries working group. We are reaching out and adding some additional members to make sure we've got a very good and diverse cross-section. And we're also working on a concept around a fisheries science panel. So stay tuned on that, working with the fisheries working group, and we hope to have more to relate later this spring. Next slide. As folks know, because we've provided updates before at previous task force meetings, but I did want to remind everybody about a really important partnership with BOEM, starting our 7th year for marine mammal and sea turtle surveys, this is aerial surveys, and we've also done, in terms of marine mammals, passive acoustic surveys as well. And then 3 years of marine bird work. So a lot of that data and information is informing the leaseholders as they are developing their plans, and as we are working now, for example, on Vineyard Wind, to start scoping in their NEPA review. We've also done 2 years of benthic characterization in the areas with UMass Dartmouth, with SMAS, with Professor Kevin Stokesbury. Next slide, please. And it's also important to point out, in addition to the studies and characterization, significant investments by, again, both the state and federal government in terms of, preparing the Commonwealth and the region for this clean energy sector that's developing here, which includes the Wind Technology Test Blade Center in Boston and the New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal, which is a multi-purpose facility which will handle a lot of the staging and deployment of the offshore wind projects. Next slide. And then my last slide here is just a quick update. Vineyard Wind is the project which is formally commenced its state review and permitting. So I just give folks just a quick update on that. Back in December, they submitted their environmental notification form pursuant to the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act. After public comment and review, the Secretary issued a certificate on that ENF calling for the preparation and development of both a draft and then subsequently a final EIR. Vineyard Wind also submitted their federal consistency certification at the beginning of the month, and we're currently reviewing it for completeness, and we expect that will be out for public notice and comment as well later this month or early May. This evening, I believe, the Energy Facility Siting Board is holding a public comment hearing relative to 3 petitions they have for Vineyard Wind under their jurisdiction. And the last bullet here is just to remind folks that other state permits, including those from our Department of Environmental Protection, those processes have yet to begin, and I think Rachel showed that back when she was doing her overview. So that's just a quick sort of context and background, and if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Great, thank you very much, Bruce. Amanda, at this time, can you please open the task force member conference line for questions for Bruce? And also, if any task force members have any additional updates that they would like to share at this time, that would be also appropriate.
Thank you. As another reminder, please just press *1. As a reminder, *1. One moment for our first question. Our first question comes from Karen Chitalo from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. I just have one question regarding your fisheries group, your work group. Are you going to be inviting New York fishers to be a part of that group, or is it mostly going to be New England fishers? Just curious.
Yeah, we've got representatives that work out of several different ports, including those out of New York. And we are, as I mentioned before, augmenting our work group to make sure that we're getting that right cross-section.
Okay, because I know some of our scup fishermen were very interested in the area and concerned, and so we just wanted to make sure that their voices were heard. Okay, thank you.
You bet.
At this time, there are no further questions.
Okay, actually, before we move into action items and next steps, we had one follow-up comment from Brian.
This is actually a kind of follow-up to Karen Chaitala. This is Brian Hooker. I didn't know if, since we are on this task force member update part, I know you guys are also working on a technical group. Do you have an update on your fisheries technical working group? And, we're, from BOEM's perspective, we're very interested in how to incorporate that in a mid-Atlantic region, in addition to kind of the southern New England region. Do you have any updates on that? I think you have to hit *1, maybe?
Yeah, Karen probably has to hit *1 again.
Karen, please press *1. One moment. Karen, your line is open.
Thank you. Hi, Brian. Yeah, the work group has not met yet. We're still putting together, looking at a listing of members, and the mission statement has been put together already, and some of their tasks, and that's going through a review process, and we're developing lists. But we are considering having a more regional approach, especially for the New York Bight area, since we do have fishers from so many different areas. That would include fishers coming out of Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Jersey. And so we were considering having that. We were going to have a joint meeting of recreational and commercial at a first technical work group, and then probably break it up into 2 separate work groups. But we're going to see how it all plays out. But right now we're looking at different memberships. But I'm glad you raised that issue, because it's something that we're interested in collaborating with the other states and others on, to ensure that the fishers are not feeling like they're being, because they do feel, believe me, they do feel like they're being pushed out, and so that we want to make sure that they can have their voices contained and help develop the best management practices possible.
Right. No, thank you for that update. And from BOEM's perspective, and I know from the perspective of the National Marine Fisheries Service, we definitely are looking toward incorporating the fuller region. As we move, this is kind of a pilot, what we have going on with southern New England right now, and it will definitely incorporate those perspectives outside of the southern New England region. I think, partly what we were doing is modeling upon the council, areas. We're definitely open to, to how to do that moving forward, and we look forward to discussing with you in the future. So. Mid-Atlantic is not being left out in this discussion.
Okay, good. So, because you have the overlap of the 2 councils, we're right on the borderline. You got there's a lot of mixing and of things that are going on. So we want to make sure we get the, and also we don't want to have meeting fatigue.
Right. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks.
Thank you. We do have another question from David Kozak. Your line is open.
Good morning. Bruce, I guess getting back to your discussion of the fisheries working group, would you also be able to specifically reach out to Connecticut fishers? I know there was some interest out of the fleet out of Stonington to be more involved in having their voice heard. Can you make a note to reach out to them, and I can get you in contact with our marine fisheries group if you need more specific information on how to do that?
Yeah, that'd be great. You can certainly pass on contact information, and we can pick up that thread.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There are no questions at this time.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, everyone, for all of the presentations today. As we mentioned earlier in the beginning of the meeting, they are all available on our website now. We will follow up with links to where they are available on the website, as well as make a recording of this webinar available for folks who weren't able to participate. You can share that link with them. They can view it. And if there are any follow-up questions, you can always contact myself or any of the folks that are listed in any of the notices that are open right now. I also wanted to mention that the task force membership roster is available on BOEM's website. If anyone has any updates on points of contact that, for instance, may have retired or no longer are the representative for the state officials, federal officials, or local elected officials or tribal officials, please go ahead and contact us, myself directly. This is Jessica Stromberg again. And we'll make sure that the right folks are around the table for any follow-up meetings that we have. At this time, I believe we would like to, I'm going to put up a slide that just gives some links to where you can find additional information about Rhode Island and Massachusetts activities on our website, and I think we would like to move into the informal public question and answer session. So Amanda, if you could open up both the task force line and the public conference line, and right now we'll have a public question and answer session until about noon, or until there are no more questions.
Okay, one moment while I open up everyone's lines.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And they'll still have to press *1 versus ask, correct?
Oh, I apologize. All right, if you'd like to ask a question, please press *1. At this time, there are no questions.
Okay. Well, if anyone has any follow-up questions, as I mentioned, you can feel free to email myself or any of the individuals that made their presentations today. Contact information is listed in the presentations, as well as I mentioned, all of the Federal Register notices. Jim, would you like to give any last minute?
Just want to mention on behalf of the task force here, the task force members, and on behalf of BOEM, we really appreciate everyone's participation today. I think this was a very good exchange, very well organized. A lot of good information was transmitted in both directions. We appreciate your participation, and we look forward to continuing working with you as we move closer to the development of these leases. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and we will now be ending the meeting recording. Thank you, Amanda, and please pass along our thanks to Diane.
I will do that. Thank you so much, and that concludes today's conference. Thank you for participating. You may